this call, so we'll start recording now so that everyone who wasn't able to make it can still access this presentation. So Sean, I'm just going to give you control of the presentation, so you should be able to go ahead.
Thanks very much, Lisa, and thanks for the introduction. So what I'm here to talk about today is a case study that is really essentially around protecting reputation. So when we know tough news is coming, being really mindful of how we manage it is really key to protecting reputation. And the case study I'm going to talk to you about today relates to the closure of a power station in our largest city in New Zealand. So what I'll do is I'll walk through a bit of introduction about Contact itself. I'll talk through some of the challenges and how we executed that, and at the end I'll go through some takeaway tips and some key principles. So Lisa, if you could just move the slides on, that would be great.
Sure.
So the first thing is really just a bit about Contact. So onto the next slide too, please. So just a bit about Contact. We're one of New Zealand's largest energy companies. We sell electricity and gas and LPG to homes and businesses. So we have around 1,000 employees across 22 locations within New Zealand. We have over 500,000 customers. We have 68,000 shareholders who are based within New Zealand and around the world. And on to the next slide. And in terms of our operations of our business, we have 2.9 billion in net assets. We have 11 power stations across New Zealand. So what you see here is the hydro power station down in Clyde, but we also have geothermal power stations as well as gas-fired power stations. And we produce and sell around a quarter of New Zealand's electricity generation. So on to our story, which is the next slide. It's actually, and another slide too, thanks Lisa, it's actually a love story, but with engineers and the machine that they were really devoted to. But don't worry, I'm not going wildly off topic. You'll get hopefully some useful things to take away at the end as well. Next slide. So this is the machine I was talking about. This is the Otahu B power station, situated in Auckland. Built in the 90s, in full power, it generated enough electricity to power around 400,000 homes. On the next slide, you'll see though, there were some quite old school beginnings. So way back in 1968, the New Zealand Electricity Department commissioned Otahu A station. And at the time, it was one of the biggest gas turbine stations in the world. So that's pretty emotional stuff for the young engineers who were involved at the time of building it. Contact's only been in existence for 20 years, but some of the guys who worked here actually built the place back in the 60s. So, how many of the years do you think the longest serving employee spent at Otahu? Well, on the next slide, we meet Marty. And Marty spent 38 years working there. So for many, it wasn't just a job, it was their life. And on the next slide, we see Maury, who spent a mere 28 years working there. So I guess the reason for sort of talking about this is, working there was what defines some of these individuals. And it's really relevant to the story today as it contributes to the challenge that we had at hand. And on the next slide, we talk a bit about that. So I think as communicators, we do some of our best work when things are really a challenge. And before I get into the challenges, I thought, I'd spend a few minutes setting the scene and talking about some of the situations that we found ourselves in when it came to communicating this. It was pretty clear that the way we managed this was going to be critical to protecting our brand. So to give you a bit of context on the next slide, over the course of the 5 years before the closure of this power station, Contact and many other companies within New Zealand have added new renewable electricity generation supply to the market, like our Te Mihi Power Station, which is a geothermal power station, which is pictured here and is situated near Taupo in the central North Island. On the next slide, it's also key that we'd also done a lot of stuff within Contact to make our generation supply more flexible. So we were building smaller gas-fired generation plants, things that were faster to turn off and on. That's so at peak times of the day, when people want to use electricity most, which is around breakfast and dinner time, these things could be turned off and on quickly to meet the needs of customers in terms of the demand. So on the next slide, around that demand and supply challenge, the picture had really changed in New Zealand. So demand growth for electricity had slowed, a whole pile more supply had been added to the market, And New Zealand, unlike some other nations, such as the States, we can't import and export across states because we're an island. So the amount of supply needs to cover the whole country. But also, if you've got too much, then that's a challenge too for those who provide it. There was also some uncertainty around the ongoing operation of our largest industrial customer in New Zealand, which is an aluminium smelter, which uses 1/7 of all electricity supply in New Zealand. And so we got to the stage where Contact had too much supply in the form of electricity generation in the system. And despite putting a call out to the market to see whether people wanted to, for their own risk management purposes, pay for the privilege of that staying around, no one was keen to pay to keep that. We'd made a lot of changes to the way we operated the Otahu power station to make it more flexible. The team had done a great job. They'd done their best. They'd sort of made something that was designed to operate constantly the whole time, to something that could be turned off and on a bit faster. But ultimately, it was no longer what the market needed. So our decision was made to close the station. And this was one of our 2 old power stations that we decided to close. So having made that decision, on the next slide, it became quite clear that it really was going to be all about relationships. We needed to really manage those in order to do a good job. Our situation was complicated by the fact that we're a listed energy company, so that means that we have stock exchange requirements around how and when we release information to investors. But clearly it was going to be damaging if that was the way numerous stakeholders who we work with found out about this change. So what we needed was a highly coordinated and precise approach to ensure that we controlled the narrative on news and to protect our brand. We had 15 audiences, all with different needs, different perspectives on the situation, and preferences for comms channels. And we needed to talk to them all at the same time. So it needed to be planned to the minute and communicated by the relationship managers. We had employees, investors, media, analysts, customers, suppliers, contractors, union, some waterway groups, local communities, government, local politicians, regulators, people that operate the electricity system, electricity market participants, and of course the general public. So a lot of people to kind of consider. And when we were doing that, our tikanga guided us. So on the next slide, sort of start talking about that. And one of the unique things about working in New Zealand is our cultural connection, but to something deeper. And our tikanga translates to our way, which embraces the Māori intergenerational way of thinking. It's how we do things at Contact. And the first part of that on the next slide is our purpose. And our purpose is something that's a little bit different and unexpected from an energy company in a traditional industry. So our purpose is to help New Zealanders live more comfortably with energy. And below that, on the next slide, sits our principles. So our principles are guidance that helps us make decisions every day. And following that is our commitments. And these define the sustainable outcomes that we always strive to achieve for our key stakeholders. And we have 5 of them. So our stakeholders that we list in as our shareholders, customers, employees, communities, and business partners. And then when we drill down to the next level, we have our behaviours, which is something that we introduced a couple of years ago to replace what were values in our organisation. So these describe how we want to work together as employees. They're colloquial, they're to the point. And we wanted to be able to go out and demonstrate how we had lived our tikanga and used our principles and commitments and behaviours to guide us on the way we dealt with this tricky situation. So what I'll now do is sort of talk through a few of those audiences and talk about how we've used these things to help us inform how we communicate with them. So the first one are customers. And for customers, politicians, and industry participants, it was about security of electricity supply, so that knowing that that wouldn't affect the ability to keep the lights on, and whether there was going to be any customer price impact. So what we did here is went out and provided assurances around that. We used facts as proof points here. So, in our scenario, while the Otahu station previously, 5 years before, would have run all winter, we did a whole bunch of renewable generation, which had effectively replaced that gas generation. And we're in a situation where only one of our 2 big gas power stations was running for a quarter of the time during winter. And there was also the other fact that we'd gone out and gone to market participants and offered them the ability to buy capacity from our station, and no one had taken that up. So we had some really rational things we could use with those particular audiences. For investors, we were announcing this on our full year results day. So we had to not only sort of time with what we wanted to do with the market and all the other stakeholders, but we'd purposely lined it up for one of our regular reporting days of the year. So we already had meetings planned with investors, and for them, their key considerations were around numbers and cost save. What would it add to the bottom line? When will we do it? And obviously they were pleased with what we were able to tell them on that front. We also had some quite unique community stakeholders. So this is a photo of the lake that borders the power station. And what had happened here is when the power station was constructed many years ago by the government prior to Contact coming into existence, a weir was put in this waterway which created the lake, and this water was used for cooling for the power station. Now, no nasty chemicals were put into the waterway by the power station through that process, but the existence of this weir meant that this lake was catching a whole pile of undesirable garbage and things in it that other people downstream were throwing in the lake. And you now had the situation where the community had a lake or a waterway that was, not quite as pristine as they would like. And there was a community body which we were part of who were looking at how they might beautify this lake. So when we came to communicating the fact that we were selling this or closing and then eventually selling this power station to another person to use the land in a different way, we clearly needed to be very careful that we were informing these people about our decision, what we were doing, but that we weren't going to be seen to be walking away. Obviously, you wouldn't want opposing views from people on this committee to come out and be starting to sling mud at our organisation around our actions and I guess having any messages around their perception around how much accountability we were showing in this space. So we needed to reassure them that we were going to continue our involvement in the appropriate way and hand it over to the new owners. And then for the local community and local politicians more broadly, it was about reassuring them that we were treating our impacted people well. So I want to now move on to talking about employees, and I'll start first with the broader group of employees, so the people who weren't impacted by the change but were part of Contact. And what they wanted to know, in line with our tikanga, was that we were doing the right thing by our people. So we made sure that our approach and actions were clear and transparent, and we encouraged these people to also support those affected. We communicated by email, video, and by empowering the affected people to tell their, at times, quite emotional stories, and asking these other employees to be there and support them. When it came to the people affected, on the next slide, there were approximately 33 people that were impacted by this change who worked at the station. And this is where we spent the majority of our time and effort getting it right. So we wrapped support around the station manager, who was briefed the night prior, and we ensured all employees were going to be on site on the day of the announcement. And we had senior management and HR come to site to deliver the news of closure. The messages we gave covered the real and rational reasons for the closure, but importantly acknowledged their efforts and reassured them that we'd be doing everything we could to support them. On to the next slide. And that support also, what that included was HR support on the day and ongoing, as well as access to independent free counselling. It included the continuation of the incentive payments which we had been in place for a couple of years as the long-term future of the site was uncertain. And we've been providing with them development plan assistance around those few years of uncertainty. So what we did was boost that with free access to CV preparation services, job hunting support for those who wanted it, because some people were going to take this as an opportunity to retire, and also naturally full redundancy payments. But what we also did was we were actively supporting people to find roles with other companies, including competitors within the industry who required a similar skill set to what they had. So we had people at the site who were engineers, technicians, and obviously there's lots of other businesses and competitors that work in that space. So we were working closely with those parties to kind of identify possible opportunities nearby. What we also did though on the next slide is look at some innovation. So we came up with a thing, our HR team came up with a thing called Fresh Start. So the situation we found ourselves in was that we have quite an ageing population in terms of the workforce within Generation. Lots of people have been in the industry for a number of years. And there are people at other sites who do the same sort of roles, so they might work on a power station at another part of the country, who maybe want to continue or looking for a change or wanting to move on from Contact or wanting to retire. We created a situation where people from Otahu could come and take up those roles at another site, and that other person could retire and have redundancy payments to support them to make their change. So this was really a win-win. People who wanted to move on or do something else outside Contact, there was an easy path to do that. But for people who wanted to continue working with Contact and who were at the site affected, they could move to another one of our power stations and keep within the company and keep developing their skills. So this was a win-win that was achieved for a handful of people. I think it's great. We also, it was really important as part of how we managed the situation that we acknowledged and celebrated our people. So, and this goes back to our TCAR and how we think about the way we want to interact with our people and the way we operate our company. So what we did is we celebrated them in the announcements, we personally thanked them, and in the media and internal comms, we also reinforced, the great job they'd done, what they'd achieved over the long term, but also over the more recent term where life had been a bit uncertain for them in the role. And we'd been asking them to operate this machine that had been designed to operate a certain way, far more flexibly, and look at for innovations. So on the next slide, you can see some of the comments in terms of what we said in the media release. So from our CEO, he said, "I'd like to acknowledge the work our team at Otahu have done in the recent years to adapt the operation of the station to better meet the changing needs of the market while we've considered the future of the plant." And then he went on the next slide to explicitly sort of state this and said, "Our decision to close is no reflection on the team's professionalism, which has seen the safe operation of the site through a 3-year period of uncertainty. We have rewarded our team's commitment and supported them through this time and will continue to do so." So for us, it was really important that we were really clear externally, both acknowledging our people so that they would feel proud about what they'd achieved, but also we didn't want anyone outside our organisation to think that we might be treating these people in anything less than a really positive way around how we were managing this. And then we wanted them to know that we were supporting them, we're doing everything we can to make what was a tricky time for many of them as easy as it could be. And on the next slide, there's a few examples of how we gave our people a voice. So we sought and told their stories. We went to past managers and people who had worked there. We spoke to current workers and managers. We even received a poem from one of our engineers, which was pretty flabbergasting. It was just really unexpected. We devoted a whole edition of a newsletter that went out to that part of the business on, the station and what had been achieved there and some of the history and some of the stories. And then we also photographed them at work and made them a photo book. And that was a real winner of an idea that helped them keep the memories alive and reminisce also at some of the great things that achieved. On the next slide, you see the front page of one of the community papers. And this is sort of about us. It was really important that we told the local community the story of our people there and what we were doing and why. And we pleasingly had them convey our key messages on their front page, including comments about looking after our people and thanking them, which you saw before. So when it came to the final day and acknowledging the celebration, one of our directors, Whaidius, did the karakia, which is acknowledging the spiritual connection Māori have with the land. Then our CEO and our operations GM and our site manager all spoke. The rock you can see in the photo, this was a dedication stone for the station, which was blessed by local Māori in a traditional ceremony on opening. So we wanted to bring closure to that to allow it to be moved, and marking the closure with a formal Māori ceremony felt right to the guys. It felt like closure. So on the next slide, you can see a few more pictures of us that walks that went on that final day. The guys there looking at the photo books, and they really liked telling their stories in the lead up to the closure, reminiscing over times they'd had with each other at the plant, and they sort of helped keep it alive. And they kind of had, after the official ceremony, they had a barbecue and a team photo and that sort of thing. Interestingly, with the photo book, it was an idea from the comms team to do that, but what we did is we really put how that would be shaped in their control. So we had a photographer come to site, and we got him back 2 or 3 times and let the guys on site direct what should happen, who should be covered, and what bits of kit should be photographed, because after all, they knew bits that were most important to them, the bits that meant something, and it was really great to be able to give them the control around what would be documented. And when we packaged up and reflect back on everything we've done with the project, on the next slide, Tom Reinhardt, who's the operations manager, he wrapped it up by saying that Contact had an unfailing dedication towards the well-being of the people involved. And I think that was a really good mark of success around how it went process. In the end, only 13 of the 33 impacted employees were made redundant. Others are now working from other contact sites or in more roles across the generation part of the business. So what I'd like to do now is touch on some tips around things you can take away around some of our approach and what we learned. So on the next slide, it's really around what tactics you might want to look at for meeting diverse stakeholder needs. So the first one is communicating early. And clearly we had in this situation, we had been in discussions with the people on site for the previous couple of years around, look, the market is changing, the site is set up to deliver a certain type of energy, the market needs things that are slightly different, so let's try and be more flexible, but let's not create any false hope. There is challenges around how this resource is going to keep meeting the needs that the organisation is trying to meet with its generation fleet. So they were fully aware of the situation. As it came to the announcement, we made sure we got and talked to everyone and that they didn't find out secondhand from anyone. You want to think about considering everyone, not just the stakeholders who you have a good relationship with. I'm sure those are the easy ones to cover off, but consider the most vocal opponents potentially of any outcome and what they might say and do, and then have a set of messages that you're going to tailor and send out to them. Anticipate their interests. So, what are going to be the key things that they're going to be interested in? The local politicians are going to have quite a different set of questions to investors versus our employees who may be not at the site but at other sites. Look to use your relationship managers. So for each of those stakeholders that I went through earlier, there's a set of people within our business who talk to those people, manage those relationships, perhaps sell to those people or manage the community relationship. And those are the ones that are really best placed to deliver the news. Obviously you want to be consistent around what you say. So the way that we achieved that was by coming up with, a really tight plan around who was going to communicate and when, and here was the key messages that they should be talking to. But I think using those managers of those relationships who already have an established rapport with the people they're talking to is far more effective than sort of trying to send something out centrally. And around the last point of being consistent, I think it's really key that you're being consistent with the different audiences and you don't try and dress up the outcome as being for a different reason to different people. Nothing will catch you out like sort of trying to be too clever there. You've got to be straight up and be really consistent with how you tell the story and why. Just be honest. And so now on the next slide, I'll just step through a few principles that I feel are important if you want to be communicating really authentically in these challenging situations. So the first one is around empathy, and that's about head and heart. So it's about being human and showing your support for people, what they've achieved, what they're going through, and recognizing that people have different ways of processing things. For this particular scenario, we had some people that we discovered didn't tell their family for several days, and other people who, are visibly angry or shocked or upset, they're going to process things different ways. What you need to do is tailor your approach to their needs and not yours, and provide the support and, the support mechanisms there to help them, be that through personal contact with people they can talk to and through some of the practical things that could help them when they're looking for other roles or looking at making a change or looking at managing the situation for themselves. The next one is having, your decisions based on principles. So I touched on, for contact, we have the tikanga and the commitments and principles. We have behaviours. I think that you want to set some things that are really going to guide how you deal with the challenging bit of communications. So company values or things that you might have that are similar to that are really useful to pin your approach to. And I think it's really good to be very overt in how you communicate with your people and demonstrate, look, that we're doing it this way, and that's in accordance with what we value and what we talk about being important to us as an organisation. I think sometimes these moments of truth are really powerful examples of why those values or principles or commitments that the company may have are meaningful, and it helps you bring them to life and demonstrate that you're living them. The next one is around fronting up, being timely and communicating in person. So this is about, when you're delivering difficult news, send the right people. Seniority, I think, shows a great deal of respect. and have them there on site to support the person who might be the natural leader. So in this situation, we had a site leader. He's going through the situation himself. We can't be expecting him to front this news to people. We need to go there and support him, certainly on the day, and have ongoing support there, and then step back a little bit and give him the ability to manage the process, but not leaving him feeling unsupported as he moves through his own personal challenges around the result of the decision and what that means for him personally and his family. The next one is around being vulnerable, courageous, and honest. So it's fine to be vulnerable, and be open about how you feel. We saw a lot of that through this particular case study. Both those people who had to go there and communicate the news, they were quite open about the fact that it was really challenging for them to do so, but they wanted to front up and do that. We saw a fair bit of emotion from people who were reflecting on what they'd achieved at the site, and some of the communications that we sent out within our organisation. They were able to be really open about the fact that, wow, this is just really tough. And it was great that there was an environment and a culture that we've got that enables that to happen. And then you see others across the business coming back and showing their support, and both in public forums on interest and things where they can add comments, but also I'm sure directly in conversations with those people to be there and help them. One important thing around this is around the honesty, but is not allowing any false hope to be created. So when you're delivering difficult news like this, some particular people can deal with that or process it in a way where they try and to talk about the fact that there could be a different outcome. If there isn't going to be a different outcome, certainly make sure you don't create any false hope by letting them assert that and not sort of saying, look, it's not actually going to happen. I think it's really important that you don't create false hope. The next one is around two-way communication, so giving your people a voice. So they need a way to talk about what they're going through, to reflect on what's being achieved, and also to be celebrated. It's an important, really important part of the process, and it shows a real respect for them, what they've achieved in their careers and their time with you. And it also shows that we're wanting to treat people in the right way to the other employees who are obviously watching this sort of thing really closely. These are kind of moments of truth for organisations around how they behave, and so how a company acts can either have positive implications for how people feel about the company, or obviously very negative ones if the company seems to be acting in a way that people just think is not reasonable, fair, or supportive. And then the final one is backing it up with action. So deliver on what you promised, particularly to these impacted stakeholders. Nothing will damage your reputation more like a promise broken on a hugely personal and emotive issue like job losses. And there's obviously a range of other things that all of you will be communicating on from time to time where it's really emotive, people have really strong views, so you need to follow through with what you've said you'll do. So on the next slide, with a total of 66 years at Otahu with Marty and Maury, where are they now? Well, on the next slide, they're actually still there. So they both still working at Otahu, of course, and they're working on the disassembly and parts sale process. And so outside the sale of the main gas turbine, which is the biggest bit on site, their hard work and contacts have brought in an additional, 1.2 million in scrap value in terms of salvage of materials, part sales. So they're adding tremendous value still, right to the very end. Many others, as I mentioned, have moved on to parts of our geothermal business within Wairakei, which is near the central North Island, or our other business, Te Rapa, where we have a gas power station as well, to more oversight type roles, working right across the generation business. So on to the next question. That's really my case study and thoughts about how you go about protecting your brand when faced with difficult announcements. Obviously, it was quite a specific example within the energy industry, but I think many of the principles are relevant to any challenge that you face where you've got to deliver difficult news to a number of stakeholders. It's really about showing some heart. So thanks for listening today. I'll have a look at the Q&A shortly. If you'd like to ask a question, as Lisa pointed out earlier, please click on the Q&A dialog box and type that in there. So I've got a couple of questions from Rajiv. The first one is around the nature of the compensation given to employees. Excuse me. So our employees, as I mentioned, they had been on an additional incentive arrangement because it had become clear that the long-term future of the station was uncertain. So they were already on something that was rewarding them an extra, financial compensation throughout the time where it was uncertain. They received full redundancy, which in New Zealand there's provisions within an employment contract around how much redundancy you get. Now, obviously, for people who have been with the organisation a very long time, things that exist in very old employment contracts tend to have multiples of years served tallying up what you might be paid. So you can imagine some of these people that have been there a long time probably received fairly substantial payments as part of their contracts in those terms. And the other stuff that we added into that was all the support that we provide as of course the usual business, but also the additional stuff around helping them find new roles, helping them switch to roles on sites where that was available and where the skills were suited, free counselling, free support if they wanted to get their CV up to scratch, professionals that work in that space to help them, and interview techniques and that sort of thing. So that was sort of the nature of the package that was provided to them. Next question is whether the HR department was involved in developing the comm strategy. So they were involved, and how this particular one played out was, I was in the position of having worked quite closely with the senior manager in the operations part of the business, who was sort of faced with making this decision on. I'd worked with her on a number of other kind of big transactions and media things that she developed, and so she got us in quite early, and we worked alongside the person from our HR department who was obviously helping us on how we work with the people, and we sort of in a collaborative nature, we prepared the comm strategy and kind of people strategy and what material would be used and how it all come together in the timing. So it was something we did together. The next one is, how long before the announcement did you start the employees about the likelihood of closure? That's from Leanne. So this was an interesting one. So we were really challenged on this one by our stock exchange listing rules, which limit our ability to communicate with anyone apart from the market on things that could be considered market sensitive. And there's some protocols in place around the dollar value of things that are considered market sensitive. Obviously, there's lots of other players in the New Zealand electricity market who have generation stations that they run and sell into the market, and things that they have that they do day to day around understanding what supply and demands in the market will inform obviously commercial decisions they make. And investors will make a judgment on a company based on their costs and expenses and strategy. So this one was quite challenging. So I guess in terms of them having a sense that it could be a possible option of closure, a couple of years earlier we talked with investors and our people about, look, there's this changing supply and demand, there's changing dynamics, we've got this asset that is designed to be run constantly, the market doesn't really support that anymore, we're looking at ways of being more flexible. So they had a couple of years of understanding that there were, that one of the consequences could be eventual closure if we couldn't make it work. So those people working there directly and those people were brought in contact understood that that was an option. In terms of us telling them of the actual news of closure, we had to do that sort of first thing Monday, and as I mentioned with our comms plan, it was sort of minute by minute. We had to get this released to the market first, so we had to kind of make sure we had all those people there, get them in a room before anything went to the market. Then it goes to market while they're having the chat live around what's happening. So it was a really tricky thing to sort of put together. So that's sort of the answer on that one. The next one was about what efforts were put into getting them new jobs elsewhere. And so, yes, we did do a few things in this space. What we did is we had that Fresh Start program, which I mentioned, which was the option for them to go and work at one of our other sites, where someone at one of our other sites might have had similar skills but wanted to move on from Contact or take redundancy or retire. So there was that option. And then we also, through our connections, we work with lots of the same engineering and service companies that many of the other market participants do, and we obviously are aware of other market participants who have generation stations and things like that. And so our head of generation at the site was talking to various people throughout the process, and was actively looking for opportunities outside of contact for these people where they wanted to continue working in the same city, in the same field. So that's really what we did in that space. And that's all the questions we have at this stage. So what I'll do is hand back to Lisa. Thank you very much for your time.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Sean. I actually did have one more question for you. Actually, I've got two questions. The first one is, you spoke about giving the employee a voice and how important that is. I just wondered if there were any tips or examples of ways that we could do that more generally in our workplace, so that, sometimes it's great to have those channels there, so that if something then does pop up, we already have measures in place. So, in hindsight, after what you've gone through, what do you think are some great ways to give employees a voice or a platform?
Sure. So one of the things we do here is we have on our intranet, we have blogs that come from our leadership team, which is the general managers that report to the CEO, and they take turns hosting that. They have a week at a time, post once a day. People can comment on that range of debates. It's a range of personal, business, wider environment stuff around what's happening. One of the things we do in that space is often those GMs will take the opportunity to provide members of their team with the ability to sort of host one of those one day. So they might have, 5 that they blog that they're going to do across the week, and they might give 3 of them to other members of their team. And I think that gives provides a different perspective on what's happening in the organisation and what might be happening at a more operational level, and gives people the ability to, build their profile, ask questions, seek support, do that sort of thing. So I think that's one example. I think encouraging people across the organisation to tell stories. I mean, storytelling is really powerful. Lots of you will have intranets or mobile apps or things that you'll use to communicate with your employees. Getting people to talk about what they're doing in their everyday jobs, talk about some of the exciting projects or programs they've got on, or some of the challenges in those sorts of forums, I think is really powerful. And it's, of course, the comms team has a key role to play around some of the editorial and sort of thinking about what the content strategy might be for some of those internal comms channels. But I think it's really a great opportunity also to get people to tell their stories and what they're up to in their own voice. So I think that's another example. And then externally, it's giving people, the platforms and the support to go and talk at conferences and to do things like talk at webinars and to, go out and take leadership positions on topics and things that are interesting to the public. So, we do that through getting some of our leaders to go out and talk about our leadership position on safety and papers, for example, or that sort of thing. We'll engage on a topic and chat through. It was the first one, Lisa. I can't quite remember what the second one was.
No, that was really about having that platform there, so that's great. There is an additional question that has come in regarding the lead time between your announcement to staff and when the final closure was.
Yep. So I think we announced it in August, which would have been our full year results, and closure was about 2 or 3 months later. And that was a staged process where with a power station, just because it's got lots of things that work and chemicals and all sorts of things, there's a sort of a step you've got to go through to depower and de-energize and take out the appropriate fluids and things to make it safe. And so there was a process they went through to do that over a few months. And from there, it was really, that was where most of the employees left, and we had all the ceremony and things. And then it's a case of those couple of people on site, which we mentioned earlier, Marty and Maury, helping with some of the day-to-day sales. So to answer your question, a couple of months. we sort of went through a process of closing it, and then we were into a sale process. So we kind of confirmed that we were selling, and then went about that process.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Sean. That was a fantastic presentation, and I really enjoy hearing case studies because, you know, it allows us to learn lessons based on something that happened, and we can put measures in place today for something that could potentially come in the future. So there's one more question that's come in that, if you don't mind, we've got a few more minutes to cover off that. You want to go through that?
So this one is around if there's a platform to knit together past employees as a community and family. The honest answer to this one is I'm not too sure. So I'm not quite close enough to it to know. There is a number of them. As I mentioned, we only had, there was sort of 13, I think, of the 33 that had to leave, that left Contact as part of this. So those other ones continue to be around Contact's business, and obviously have the opportunity to catch up as they no doubt cross paths on various projects and initiatives that are on the go. So it's a good question, Rajiv. Thanks for the question. I'm not too sure on that. I think you know, a general observation for me is obviously that would be a great thing to do, and there's a range of social tools and things that you can use these days that are really helpful for that sort of thing. You know, you've got Facebook groups or anything like that that enable that to be done really easily. So great question. And there's one further question, which is just about whether this is being recorded, which the answer is yes. So I'm sure Lisa and others will send out information about that in due course.
Yes, so I've just put up the last slide there that has your contact details there, Sean. So thank you for sharing those. And again, thank you very much, Sean, for being the first speaker on our webinars, and thank you to our audience for joining this webinar. And as I said, we're going to be hosting these every 2 months on a range of topics in an APAC friendly time zone or time period, and on topics that are relevant to you. So that doesn't mean that they're only about Asia Pacific. Will certainly look global as well, but they're relevant to the people who work in this region. So the session has been recorded. We'd also love your feedback. So we'll be sending an email out to everyone who registered with a link to the recording and also a link to our survey so that you can provide some feedback. And feel free to put general comments in there as well, suggested topics, feedback on the process of registering through to the Q&A session, you know, so from the beginning to the end of this whole planning. We really appreciate it. I didn't introduce myself at the beginning, but I'm Lisa McNally, and I'm the Director of Professional Development for ABC Asia Pacific. So we're looking at many different things we can do to help you to develop you professionally. We've got some exciting announcements to make in the near future around that. So thank you for joining, and I will see you all again in 2 months' time, so in 2017. Thanks a lot.